Hello! We're here. We're here and we are streaming.
Back for round two. It's only been, what, 2-3 years?
Please,
like it.
Please, Anne, it's been months.
Alright, 2 or 3 months. Alright, are we picking up where we left off before then?
I think so, yeah. So, it's been a while. No? Okay.
No.
Okay.
Not curls. Tomorrow is curls day. You can have fun tomorrow. Today is not fun day. You have to wait till Tuesdays for fun.
Great. So, it's been a while since we've done the D&D homebrew. And the last time, and only time that we've done it so far, we homebrewed 2 spells, which were revolving around the concept of vomiting things up, so that's nice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's something that we made.
Yep.
And then we changed course onto this topic here, which was some alternate rules for vampirism and lycanthropy, as you can see on the screen.
Yep. Because you very much like your lycanthropy.
I do.
You're interested in vampirism.
I'm interested in vampires.
For nothing more than an antithesis to your hobby.
Yes. The two of them work so well and oppose each other so well.
Yeah. Which, that's the first point that I'd probably like to bring up. My question of, I think I asked it in the last one, is are there any other curses that we could potentially add that would fit into a kind of D&D world if we are thinking of these as curses? Because if we've got, when you boil it down, like what is vampirism and what is lycanthropy? So lycanthropy is easy. You are cursed to have an animal form that you have limited control of. Mm-hmm. Is probably the broadest catch-all for everybody. You have some degree of control over, but the curse side of it is it makes you more primitive, more feral, less human, essentially.
Yeah.
So you're more likely to hurt the ones that you care and love about. And then vampirism, at its core, is immortality through undeath, I'd say. It's kind of like lichdom.
A little bit.
In like, it's along the same sort of vein of lichdom, but you don't have to kind of supply it with anything.
No, you don't. It's weird because it is kind of a mix between lycanthropy and lichdom, because quite obviously there's loads of different ways, but the common way that people become vampires is they get bitten by a vampire, which implies that it spreads, kind of like a plague or a disease in a way.
Yeah.
But much like lycanthropy, it spreads like a plague or a disease, but for the sake of game mechanics, it's considered like a curse. And
the initial
curse removes it.
The initial creation of it, I suppose, we picture is through, in our history from European folklore, it was sort of like a satanic thing, wasn't it? Because it was someone who was opposing the church, because it was Vladimir the Impaler, and the sort of sea of blood that he kind of carved for himself, I think.
There's also, from a narrative perspective, funny enough, if we had Curls here, she'd have a lot to say on this topic, is that when it comes to gothic horror and novels like Dracula, vampires are literally meant to be like a parallel for the noble class, is like what they're meant to parallel, which is why you get vampires that have these castles and these grandiose balls and this sort of gothic dress and things, which is why they literally feed on the poor. It was meant to be a sort of synonym.
Right, okay.
It was meant to be sort of a synonym for the noble
capitalism.
Yeah, capitalism, but from way back when. So
right.
how nobles would feed off the the working class who would till the farms and stuff, and they would pay tithes to the noble class. It was meant to be synonymous with that, but it was a very literal case of they literally sucked the life out of people and ate them, basically. That was kind of what classic gothic vampires sort of represented, which is why we now have this whole synonymous thing of a vampire lives in a castle, and for some reason they are noblemen who are very wealthy, and it's like, oh, they're ever so pale and they have all this money, and it's because that was how they dressed back then. They would put powder on their faces and stuff. That was how this image came up. They were hand in hand, which I suppose is maybe where the idea of vampires versus werewolves came in, because I feel like
the noble versus the feral.
Yeah, conversely, werewolves are very feral and animalistic, whereas vampires are upper class and generally quite educated and intelligent creatures. That's where this sort of opposition comes from.
Well, I did a little bit of reading, which I'll get into in a little bit, but then if you boil down vampirism in a D&D sense, so if we're taking out like Christianity and the church and our faith, because that would not translate well into D&D, because they would just get mobbed by the millions of religions that are in that world. Vampirism then is acquiring immortality at the cost of your humanity, because you become undead and you have a desire to feed on fellow man, which is something that a human does not innately have. Obviously you said symbolism about like feeding on the poor and stuff, but from a vampire's point of view in a D&D world, they're not going to be picky on who.
No. Obviously,
so
that's how.
That's where the translation kind of blurs. Then of now.
And again, that's like modern interpretations as well.
Yeah.
Of like how things change over time.
Yeah. So.
But it's good to know where these like stereotypes or tropes, so it's good to know where they come from, so that you can sort of see the chain of like, well, why do they look like that? It's because of this link of once you start thinking about it that way.
So by that stretch then, so you got vampirism is humanity in exchange for immortality. Lycanthropy, you've got still immortal, aren't they, I believe?
Also varies.
Also
varies, I think.
Okay.
But because obviously, like, it does talk a lot of, there's the very common, you need a silver bullet. You need a very common silver bullet to kill a werewolf.
Silver bullet or fire or certain kind of like herbs. Sorry.
Yeah, wolfsbane.
There's different, as you say, there's different ones for that. But what is the the upside, I suppose, it would be for a werewolf. I suppose it would be being like superhuman, because there are traits that carry over even when you're in human form.
Yeah, that's
you're
one
still
that
super strong.
I
You've still
quite
got the senses. So I suppose it's sort of superiority in exchange for kind of humanity in a way, or I suppose you're just cursed with an animal form. But I'm wondering then, are there any other curses where we could say you get X, which is what you want, in exchange for Y?
Yeah.
Always equal immortality, but very rare, does not include longevity of lifespan.
Yeah.
So
which is ironic because wolves do not have as long a lifespan as humans. So it's ironic that getting partially an animal gives you a longer lifespan when it's not a thing. But again, that's more the folklore kind of thing.
It's not a genetic thing. You're not being like partially bred with it. It's purely magic. It's essentially like you've been cursed with a very powerful polymorph in a way, with a few niche little twists. So genetics don't really have anything to do with it. They could turn you into like a were-dragon, and it's like just because it's a dragon does not mean that you get more life out of it.
Yeah, as I said, I said it more as like an interesting thing of like, that's a funny thing.
So in that dichotomy, then, if we want to boil it down, so then vampirism would be your sort of I would imagine them as having the very high and very low end, because they're immortal. They physically cannot die. They have to be defeated. They don't age because their bodies are undead, so they just live forever and ever and ever.
Whereas I think you can definitely you do find young werewolves and old werewolves. Whereas with vampires, you just kind of find vampires. You don't tend to find, whatever age they are is the age they are. Yeah,
I suppose then that a good example for that would be, although that he's not a werewolf in any way, shape or form, but Wolverine would be a good example. He has an extended lifeline. He heals phenomenally well, and he's also incredibly dangerous because he's essentially got, like, to a degree, superhuman abilities, because he can carve through people, even though that's, in no way, as I said, he's not a werewolf in any stretch or form, but he's kind of got like he runs along the same lines, doesn't he?
If you look at him from a purely subjective standpoint, you could say that he has werewolf traits.
Yeah, he behaves in a very similar way to how you imagine a werewolf. He doesn't like to use his, I know they're not his powers. His powers is healing, but he doesn't like to use his claws. He doesn't like to go feral because obviously it hurts him, and because he doesn't like that side of himself too much, but it's there as a necessity. The healing and life longevity would kind of translate into, you've been cursed with magic, and that magic wants to prolong your suffering in a way, because it wants you to be live longer so that you can suffer longer, so you can hurt the people that you grow attached to more. Death is an easy escape from your curse. It's one of those things. Your life.
It's one of those things where quite often in media, werewolves and vampires are often quite solitary things, even though you would naturally think of a wolf being a pack animal. You do find werewolf packs, but they're only ever with other werewolves.
Yes.
There's very much a, werewolves struggle to be around humans. Obviously there are exceptions, which is fine. This is part of the reason that we're going to be having all of these different variants of, like, people have different things that they want and different exceptions to different rules.
Fulfilling different fantasies.
But generally, werewolves will be with other werewolves or by themselves, because there is that sort of, feralness of attacking people and people in turn attacking them to protect themselves, kill the wolf, being chased out with pitchforks and things.
In a way, is also going to be tied to, not necessarily like with each generation, but the initial cursing of the werewolf is probably going to be some sort of ironic thing of, like, I've turned you into a creature that relies on company, and you are now going to want to distance yourself from company, thus sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of, like, the lone wolf is not strongest, the lone wolf is the one that dies.
Yes,
and you are forcing yourself to become the lone wolf because you are afraid of hurting other people.
Yeah,
so
it's
you
like
are
you desperately want companionship and attention, but either you're driven away, or when you get close,
you end up hurting
people. You end up hurting them. You have no
that would
control.
be like the ultimate kind of, this curse is well thought out because it fucks you in every single possible answer. If you seek help, you'll hurt them. If you don't seek help, you'll hurt yourself. So what are you going to pick?
Yeah.
That's like the perfect
that's why it's
sadistic
a curse.
Yeah. That is a true sadistic curse. Other than a curse of, like, modern day one would be just like, I gave him cancer or something. It's like, well, that is horrendous. It's like, no, I'm going to put some thought into this. I'm going to make him live for a long time, and I'm going to make every waking moment just utter stress and anxiety and pain and suffering. That's what a curse should be.
Yeah.
So that would be your werewolf.
You can't just curse someone with death, because that's not a curse.
Exactly. Eventually it just kind of goes away, and if they seek to hurt, just kill themselves to be like, the world will be better without me, it's like, well, we're not going to make it that easy. So by that logic then, if we've got the animal front covered, because lycanthropy you can spread to anything, pick your persona of choice, essentially, and you can just be aware whatever.
Yeah.
Vampirism is undead. Are there any things that we can look in that way? If you look at it from a type, purely on type, you've got undead covered, you've got beasts covered. What about things like monstrosities or aberrations or constructs? Could there be a curse where you are turned into something such as that?
I suppose you could, much like how there is the book for how to make golems, and how there's the soul cage spell. Mm-hmm. You could probably make up some kind of curse which, sort of Tin Man-esque, traps somebody in essentially a construct body. Kind of like a Warforged, but I guess not the same, because Warforged do have organic parts. It's a common misconception, but if you actually read about them, they have organic matter in them.
What about then, like, a curse that transforms their body, but they still have the same sort of drives and desires? They still get hungry, but they don't eat anymore. So the longer they go on, they still have that driving, I'm hungry, and I'm thirsty, and I'm tired, but I don't need to sleep, but my body's not adjusted to being
kind of like the pirates in the Pirates of the Caribbean. I know again that they were undead at the time, but that was what he said. It's like I can't feel anything, I can't quench my thirst, I can't quench my hunger. Because
in one respect you could say that their curse, it gave them immortality, so there was definitely a good side, but they still yearned to turn back because the quality of life they had was just awful. They hated it. It was horrendous.
They were like, we loot and plunder everything, but we're pirates, so we can't really spend this gold anywhere. No. All of the food, this lovely food that we buy, turns to ash in our mouth. We drink all this wine, but we don't get drunk, and we still feel thirsty. And it's like, this isn't living.
They've given up the quality of life in exchange for a prolonged life. So I suppose you could take elements of that and put it onto a construct of, like, every day is the same. You wake, the longer you go on, you don't feel it at first, but then as a few days go by, you wake up and you're starving, hungry. You wake up and you're...
Well, you don't wake up, you just are.
Well, sorry,
you don't sleep.
Yeah, you don't need to sleep, so you get that kind of, I feel just exhausted and I'm getting dizzy and I feel hungry all the time and I feel thirsty all the time, and it's just constant every single day.
Yeah,
that's
like when you don't need to sleep, or you can't sleep to rest your body. I mean, look at how awful insomnia is. And if someone is just cursed with that indefinitely, of like, I'm kind of tired, but no matter how much I lay down and try to close my eyes or equivalent, you just do not sleep. Unfortunately, kind of like how Alphonse was in Full Metal Alchemist. He couldn't eat or drink or sleep in his suit of armor. He just every time Ed was asleep, he just sort of sat there in the room and just like
8 hours I've just got to do.
He was just there, he would sit and read books and stuff, but couldn't do anything.
But anyway, that was just another thought I got, because the idea of we've got vampires and we've got werewolves. To some people it's like, yeah, they're cool and I like what you're doing with them, but they're a bit samey. I want to see something that's not necessarily not been done before, but something that is not as up there in popular culture kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So following creature types, we could definitely have some fun with an aberration type thing or a monstrosity thing.
Yeah. I guess the thing with monstrosities is like, how much are you just making a new kind of werewolf with those one?
That would be one to think about. Unless you just merge them two together.
Yeah, it's like, that's basically just taking a werewolf and going, well, instead of a were-tiger or a werewolf or a werewolf, it's like you're just a were-owlbear now.
Well, I suppose we could mash them two together and then say, like, beast and monstrosity, interchange. You are a magical creature hybrid now, which is essentially what a monstrosity is. But an aberration, I suppose then you're moving into the realms of like psionics, and I mean you could have interesting stuff with that, like constantly just without being able to turn it off, almost like not being able to turn off your ears or something. You just constantly know what people are thinking, so you always know what people's true opinions are about you, and everywhere that you go you can just, like Superman, he can just hear everybody's thoughts all the time, and it's unbelievably overwhelming, and because you're naturally then a suspicious person, you're just constantly just flooded everywhere you go with just these, you know, thoughts about you of, you know, people thinking up how they're going to defend themselves against you for when you inevitably turn hostile against them, and just knowing all the time that people around you don't trust you, they hate you. Just that constant flood. That can be...
I'm reminded of that scene in Bruce Almighty when he wakes up and he can hear all the prayers and he's like looking around and like, you know, squishes his ears. He's like...
Yeah. They're just noise. I can't hear them.
Yeah,
you're not
and
listening.
after, you know, he goes out to the restaurant and he can hear them all again. He's like, I can't hear you! And
Yeah.
it's like, nobody... Stop, why are you shouting?
Yeah. So that could be one.
Yeah, I remember for the monstrosity thing, there actually is an example of that in the... I think it's the second Drizzt book. When he's in the Underdark, he actually encounters a hook horror and learns that it was a underground race, which I actually haven't seen in any of the books at the moment, called a petch or something. They're kind of like, they were small creatures. I can't quite remember the full description, but there was small underground creatures, kind of like synonymous with like dwarves and gnomes, where they said that they had like a kin with the actual stone. They could hear the earth.
Right.
But he met this petch. It had been partially polymorphed by a wizard into a hook horror, in that it was essentially fully a hook horror, but it still had the memories of being a petch, because normally the spell polymorph, it technically changes everything. It's not a B. It's not the same as B shape. You keep your mental stats. So if you polymorph someone into a rat, they think they're a rat for that 10-minute period.
Right.
So he was a petch, and he knew he should have been a petch, and he could somewhat still speak common a little bit, but he was in hook horror form. And it was this really sad story of like, because petch are like one with the stone, he kept like clanking onto the walls of the stone in the Underdark because he wanted to join back in with the stone and he couldn't. And eventually his mind basically started to fall apart a little bit because, as one of the characters said to Drizzt, it was like, you know, you can't have a petch brain in a hook horror body. It doesn't work. It was a thing in the book, so that could be a monstrosity thing. Again, there's a little bit of crossover with Lycans there, I suppose. But
yeah, I'd say then that it's probably just easier just to mix the two together and just say, if you want lycanthropy, you turn into some sort of beast. Whereas like if we're doing an aberration one, like you don't turn into a mind flayer. That's its own.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say that's not a curse really. It's just a process that is going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a time limit on that, and there is an end point. You know, you turn into a mind flayer, and then you're just a mind flayer, and that's it.
What if for the aberration stuff we look at like Call of Cthulhu-esque stuff, where you
I
start
was
seeing
just thinking that,
things?
yeah, nightmares, and you see visions about what could be the future, and it starts to blur reality for you on what's actually going to happen.
Kind of like was it Will in Stranger Things? In season 2, because like in season 1 he got taken to the Upside Down or whatever. In season 2 he's walking around and everyone thinks that he's fine and he's normal, but like he basically sees visions of like the Upside Down bleeding into the real world. I think we never watched season 2.
That could be a cool thing actually, like during normal gameplay, when you're playing normally, sort of like the wild magic, every day you'll have like a thing, you know, roll on a table or some sort of thing, and sometimes you will actually have like these creatures, these visions that you have become solid. They'll actually manifest. So like that's why it won't be a case of you just got to ignore everything, you're just seeing things. Like, no, sometimes when I see things, they will come true, and we will have aberrations fight us in the middle of nowhere for no reason.
Like Don't Starve.
Yeah, madness, as you start to see like the other world. So sometimes it's not a case of you just say, well, it's just gameplay stuff, it doesn't matter, I'll just ignore it. No, sometimes they will be real, and then you'll have a combat in the middle of a city as all of a sudden these aberration things like beholder type creatures just manifest, and it's like, we need to keep you sort of under control because you are a danger to those around you. You can just summon these horrible things just because you're seeing them, and we have no idea because we can't see what you're seeing until it's too late. That's a curse. You know, why do you distance yourself from people? Because freakish things happen, and it could be that the things that you manifest don't attack you.
Maybe.
That's part of the punishment. You just have to watch.
Yeah, and people,
you can attack them, but you're just watching.
And then it's like you know, it's this sort of sad thing of like, you know, being a harbinger of doom, basically, of like, you can't come here because bad stuff always follows you, and it's like, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're clearly with them because they don't attack you, and it's like, I'm not with them.
Yeah. That to me seems like another great sort of alternative curse, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I like the idea of like lycanthropy and stuff, and I'm not really into the changing thing, and it's like, okay, well, what if just being near you can be dangerous, because bad things just follow you, like a Judas kind of thing. Cool ideas.
Like that one.
Yeah. Alright. We'll keep them for now, and we'll go.
And then we've got Ooze, which is just the Ooze wizard from Inscription, where you're just in a jar going, blah! Ah, the pain is bearable today.
Yep. First time chat.
Hello.
Welcome to our talking ramblings on nonsense.
Yes. It's not nonsense. We're discussing.
It's funny nonsense.
We're discussing things.
Why have I got my headphones on?
Why have you? I assumed you had. I assumed you had music on.
I'm just so used to when I'm at my computer putting my headset on. I'm fucking talking to you. I don't need headset on.
I assume you have music on like I do. I've got music playing.
No, I paused it because I was listening to. I don't need any music on. Fuck this. Jesus Christ.
Why are you dumb?
What are we working on? We wanted to work on some actual mechanical rules that we could put into 5th edition or potentially other role-playing systems that would better translate the role-playing side of curses such as vampirism and lycanthropy.
Yeah, but we wanted to add in like different options that people could select, because essentially there's a lot of different variations of Lycans and vampires in media, so it would evolve into sort of like having sort of like almost, we just called it like bloodlines of like you would have different strains that would, which is how you'd end up with, say, like having a werewolf or a were-tiger is essentially be like a different bloodline of the curse.
Yeah,
and that would be something that you could essentially look up on a table or roll randomly.
Yeah, the easiest example would be when you think of vampires from our own history, you think of Dracula. So Dracula would have his specific bloodline that would carry all of his benefits and detriments based on his curse. In D&D, there is also, there was a vampire called Ghoul Vampires, who is sent from. Long story short, his death spawned blight, which are plant-based creatures that feed on blood. So his descendants, generations and generations later of his bloodline, should be different. They should, behave differently. They should have different weaknesses from Dracula's bloodline, and they should grant different strengths. Like maybe the ability that every time they bleed, they summon more blights around them, and they make fights more difficult. That makes more interesting than, because otherwise you've got it where you say, well, vampires do this and this is how they behave, and they can't be seen in mirrors, and you have to stake them in the heart, and running water kills them, and then they're all a bit the same, and it gets a little bland.
Yeah. If anything, the modern interpretation in the Castlevania cartoon was a cool example, because there were loads of different types of vampire in that show.
Yeah.
Obviously there was Dracula himself, who was the strongest and the oldest, and basically kind of couldn't be killed by anything. But then you had a bunch of other vampires, like you had the Viking one, and you had that lady who was like a Japanese vampire and things like that.
Oriental.
The Oriental kind of one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Camilla, who was like from she was like another. She was also kind of like a European.
Another European one, yeah. I feel like she might have been Western European, but I don't have any evidence for that. Mainly just based on the voice actor that they chose. I feel like she was more like Germanic or something, but I could be completely off on that one. I'm not sure.
I feel like, much like Dracula, Camilla the vampire is actually another name.
Carmilla.
Carmilla.
Carmilla was actually a book written before Bram Stoker's, if I'm correct. I think it technically came first.
That's why she's called that in
right.
She was called Carmilla.
Right. Okay.
So obviously a reference to the other book, which is why she became quite an important character, because Carmilla is an important vampire in vampire history, if you want to call it that.
Yes, Carmilla is a famous vampire from before Dracula.
There you go.
This is what I was reading up on today, and this is the newest edition that I've put on this. Apparently, the very first sort of historical, I don't know if you'd call them recordings, but the first sort of description of a vampire, they weren't actually pale and noble creatures.
Oh, they're not?
No, they apparently were dark-skinned and bloated creatures that feasted on the life essence, specifically life essence, which does include blood, but I'm assuming that means that they also ate the people in general. and they would hang around the villages of where their families were and cause mischief. It said, I don't know how you classify that as mischief. And I wouldn't describe like Hitler as a mischievous individual based on what he did. You know what I mean? Like going around killing people is not mischievous, but that's what was written because folklore. I'm assuming.
That's how old folklore is.
Yeah.
Like you can go into a page about like brownies, and it literally goes, they were mischievous people. Also, maybe they collapsed mines, and I'm like, there's mischief and then there's murder. There's the different things.
There's definitely a line there, but either way. So for the vampires, instead of having like we've got up here of like the different forms necessarily, I'd put them more as like classifications. So how would you classify them? The only two I've got at the moment is I called them Tenebris because they didn't actually have a name because they were just the first recorded vampires.
Yeah.
But Tenebris, if that's how you pronounce it, is literally just
I don't know.
Tenebris, maybe it's Latin for dark.
Yes.
So I thought it's an easy enough. What did they used to call them in the days? They used to call them the dark. I thought that kind of fits. And then I've literally just written it in there that they're not pale skinned like other classifications of zombies, but because of that, they're more. I would imagine them as more feral. Then, if they hang around in villages, they basically just eat people.
Kind of like vampire spawn.
Kind of, yeah.
And like and maybe if we want to make the Castlevania comparison, just like the vampire like thralls.
Yeah.
That they had.
Yeah. So I've just put in this one that this variant of vampirism would be like they just hunger for more. They just constantly hunger. They want to eat. They want to feed on people, and as such, they're not very cohesive. They don't form groups because they're quite selfish. Because obviously, the more of them there are, the more the food's got to go around more mouths essentially, and because they just constantly eat people, if you've eaten the entire body, there's nothing there to become a vampire. So I picture them as being there would be like the lowest tier of vampire. Like other vampires look down on them because it's just like, you're not a threat. You're not. Yeah. You're just like an animal at this point, and once you're killed, that's it. You're gone. Whatever. So that could be one particular, bloodline or what from someone in history, because obviously we've got to remember at the end of the day, although people may want to become vampires or werewolves or whatnot, sometimes it will be forced upon you like a curse, like petrification. I didn't want my character to be petrified. No one wants their character to be petrified. But you fight a Medusa, and these are the problems that you're going to come up against. You have to find ways around them.
Probably a large chunk of people will probably get things like this and they'll go, "This is cool, hell yeah!" But there will be people who are like, "Well, my character is a cleric of light, and I don't want to fall from grace. I don't want to have this, so I want to get rid of it."
Yeah. So, and then we'll put in ways of like, this is how you can kind of come back from it. So that was one of them, and then obviously the only other one that I got was a true vampire. This would be like the most elite bloodline of vampire.
Yeah,
so
like a noble vampire.
Yeah, a noble vampire. This is, in your world, probably going to come from whatever the equivalent of Dracula is. So whether if it was in like Curse of Strahd, you might say Strahd will be the noble, the true vampire bloodline in this universe. So all of his vampires will have these weaknesses but these strengths and blah 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 blah. I'd put up in here as well for the vampire lineages then that all vampires would be immortal. That's just the point of vampirism.
Yes.
You're all immortal and you're all undead. Those are like the two things that you definitely are. Alongside that, you'll have your benefits and detriments, which will vary from bloodline to bloodline. And some of them, it will just depend on what strain it is. Others might depend also on the generation. The old idea of like the only way you can free yourself from a vampire is to feed on the vampire that turned you.
Yeah.
That's like a...
Or defeat them, yeah.
Or defeat them. There's different wordings on how you would do it. So like, if you were bitten by Dracula, if you then managed to drain Dracula and feed off him, you would... I don't know if it would... I think it differs from belief to belief, but it either cured you of your vampirism or it just freed you from their control. I think it does differ.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of freeing from their control, and that curing vampirism is just something entirely different, because to me it's like, how did you free yourself from being a vampire? I behaved like a vampire. That does not seem to...
No.
How did you fix the window? I went round and smashed all the rest of them. No, it's fixed. Like, you've not really fixed anything there. So, yeah, I like the idea of that freeing yourself from them, and that then can give you ties as to, well, how is it that there's 7 different bloodlines of vampire, and you can go, well, the first vampire in my world was such and such, and these 7 vampires all managed to free themselves from their control, and now we have 8. I suppose we now have 8 bloodlines of vampirism, and they're all nasty and dangerous and whatnot. But one of them is more dangerous.
We need to be noting some of this down. under some of these.
I'm just giving you a rundown of what I put where it says vampire lineages or vampire lineages.
Yeah.
I suppose if you want to, we could move on to forms. Are always a fun one because vampires are actually a little more interesting than just Lycans because they have a variety of things that don't really have any kind of explanation other than the fact of horror.
Yeah.
They can turn into bats. Why? Because they can turn into bats. Because bats come out at night.
Yeah.
And
Some of them can also turn into wolves.
Some of them can turn into wolves. They're turning into mist is another one.
Yeah.
And especially in D&D, that's a canonical one for when they reach 0 hit points, not die.
Yeah, they drop to 0
when they are
hit points.
defeated, they turn into mist to then return to their place. But I'd argue that you could say that they could turn into bats. Don't know about a wolf because a wolf you could say, well, that can still kind of fight. I mean, I know bats can kind of fight as well, but you can easily sort of wave that off as a swarm of bats. It's just frantic and escape, run away, quick.
Yeah.
Whereas a wolf, if you see a wolf run, it's like, well, technically it could still turn around and bite your head off.
Vampires used to have ties to lycanthropy and monsters akin and had domain over all things foul such as bats and wolves.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Des. So that would explain that then. I don't know about the mist.
I think that was just kind of the Eastern European.
The weather's crap.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Vampires don't like sunlight, so they live where there's no sun. Like, don't know which one came first there.
It sounds like such a Scottish or Irish thing, doesn't it? And they can turn into the weather. No, not more rain. True horror of monsters coming out of the shadows. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd argue that, a vampire turning into a bolt of fucking lightning would be scarier, but each to their own. Bit of mist. Whatever. Anyway.
It's just ominous environmental storytelling, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway. Forms. So obviously, you're going to have some vampires that don't have a form. They're just humans.
Yeah, humanoid.
Yeah, humanoid form. That would be monomorphic, which is kind of already written there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm listing like all of the different ones that they can be. So, bats.
A swarm of bats specifically, but you could also have somebody who turns into like one giant bat. That'd be quite sick. What transformations have you got? Well, I can't do the swarm of bats. I just turn into big, nasty, horrible things.
Wolf, but we're not too sure about that one. Mist. What else?
What other sort of evil creatures of the night? I mean, I guess you could say an owl. You don't have to pick things that are specifically sort of pointed and devil looking. What about gargoyle?
Gargoyle is quite a good one. You could say gargoyle.
That would be quite an interesting vampire actually, because that could be a bloodline that's like a stake through the heart. Good luck.
Yeah, made of stone.
Good luck.
Yeah. I don't know about owl. Owl doesn't sit right with me.
No,
I don't know why, but the gargoyle works.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like owls can be pretty terrifying looking when you're out there because they're, out in the middle of nowhere and you just hear this, demonic hoot come out from the trees and it can fly silently. I'd argue that an owl is pretty fucking terrifying. Thunder and lightning is too loud and obvious for vampires. Oh, of course, you've got the class element of it.
Exactly. I told you they are synonymous with the upper class.
What is the reason for your transformation, sir? Aesthetic. Go to the true old style of Gargoyle, Guardians of the Churches. After all, how many things that attack a church have holy weapons? That's an interesting one. Twilight.
No.
I mean, if you want to go down Castlevania route, Dracula could transform into like a giant sort of demon, essentially.
Yeah.
He didn't have wings. He had those kind of like winged arms.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're called.
Kind of like that a little bit.
A little bit like that, yeah.
I mean, they are still wings, but I get what you mean. Kind of like a sugar glider. They're actually
like a flying squirrel kind of thing.
Kind of like how bats actually are.
Yeah, because their hands are at the end of their wings. So he had a form that was like that, and it was giant, and it was muscular, it was hulking. Why would a vampire want to be the slowest bird? Are owls slow?
Oh yeah, they traded silence for speed. They are slow flyers because they fly silently and will pinpoint a bit of prey and they'll slowly silently fly over and then hover in the air and then
Okay.
They don't need speed.
Follow-up question: how fast is an owl flying in comparison to a human running?
I don't know.
I feel like owls flying are probably not going to be too different, and when you scale that up, I feel like, when your target is humans, it don't matter if you're that slow, as long as you're faster than the humans.
See, this is why I think you don't really see vampires who are owls, but you see them all with bats, because bats are small and fast, and they travel at night.
Okay, how about owlbear?
A vampire owlbear.
In D&D, what kind of horror would they say? This is the worst thing in the world. I was fighting a vampire, and then what happened? It turned into a freaking owlbear. That's one of the forms it can take. That's like, tanky form. It's good, but
the mental image is just so horrifying.
Yeah, well, that's the point.
A vampire.
That's the point, isn't it? You've got to think. We picture vampires which don't exist, and we try to attribute them to the things that we consider to be horrific in our animal kingdom. So in D&D, which has a much grander animal kingdom, owlbear's going to be up there, isn't it? Mm-hmm. They're common enough that people know about them, so I feel like owlbear should be on the table.
What about Peritons? Aren't Peritons... I believe I've read in Peritons lore that Peritons are actually from people who were, like, cursed to desire flesh, and they devour, like, hearts.
Yes, I believe the one in 5th edition is that it was a beautiful elf lady. It was something to do with the I'm misremembering that.
That's just the stat block, not the flavour text.
Forgotten Realms, because that's a picture. I'm sure it has something to do with that. I'm just going to read through some of these. Vampires, that's a peregrine falcon punches people's heads off like smashing the top of a bottle. Yeah. The slowest though, but it still goes at 40 miles an hour. Yeah, when your prey can run at 15 miles an hour, it don't really matter if it only goes at 40, does it? Well,
I mean, look at this picture of a Periton and tell me that that's not just a vampire owl. Yeah, it's got antlers, but that's a vampire owl, basically.
Could turn into one of them.
Yeah, so maybe a Periton is more fitting.
Yeah.
Yeah, depraved magical creatures that appeared as a cross between a giant eagle and a demonic-looking fanged stag. They were known and feared for tearing the beating hearts from victims' chests.
Yeah, I feel like the story that was in the book was that it was like a woman... Ooh. What? It was like a woman who was unfaithful to her husband, or the husband was unfaithful or something, and it kind of corrupted her, I feel. I'm sure I read that in the monster manual somewhere, that there was some sort of betrayal, and because it was love related, that's why they eat the hearts, I'm sure.
Perhaps the strangest feature of a Periton was its shadow. The shadow did not usually resemble the shape of the beast. Instead, it was said to appear as the outline of whatever creature whose heart the Periton last ate, usually an adult human. That's vampiric.
That's cool as fuck. Also, a gruesome owlbear that murders people in the woods, dismembering its victims. It's a vampire being sneaky.
True.
I mean,
also works.
Also, the monster you're thinking of can't spell its name, has a host of Periton as its pets that it uses to attack people. Ah, right. Unless I'm thinking of a harpy. Was that the story for the harpy?
Maybe.
A corrupted elf? Could be.
It could be.
Go
grab the monster manual.
It's going to bug me otherwise.
Go grab the monster manual.
Yeah, there we go. I was right. So, sages postulate that the first Peritons were humans transformed by a hideous curse or magical experiments, but bards tell a different tale of a man whose infidelity caused his scorned wife to cut out the heart of her younger, more beautiful rival and consume it in a ritual intended to forever win her husband's heart. The ritual succeeded until the woman's villainy was exposed. She was hanged for her crime, but the lingering magic of her foul ritual caused the carrion birds that feasted on her corpse to transform into the first Peritons.
Oh, wow.
That's cool as hell, and that is incredibly vampiric.
Vampiric, okay.
Very love-related.
There we go.
That is sick.
Yeah, Periton. We'll put an option for a Periton form. Should we swap Wolf for Owlbear? Since you're really set on that idea.
I mean, I feel like you should keep Wolf in there just because it's pop culture. I don't know whether to go for Dire Wolf.
I mean, you can, just to make it cooler.
Gives it some dichotomy again with
I think
Lycans. Who's the better wolf?
Yeah, this is one of those things where once we put this into like a page, you basically have a little purple box, which is basically these are suggestions. Work with your DM to, you know, work out the nitty bitty bits. These are just
Russian vampire just turns into a bear. Duh. Just claws the fuck out of everything.
Like that guy from What We Do in the Shadows.
What about spiders?
No!
It's meant to be horrifying. Would you picture that vampires could turn into spiders? I feel, yeah.
I guess they could. There is a, you know, again, in pop culture, there is a general thing of if there's like a big massive spider queen or something, it's you see loads of like husks of people that have been sort of like drained.
But spiders are on the list, you can say. Giants. Obviously, you're not going to have a bloodline that it's like you could just turn into everything because it's like it's not really what vampires are about.
This isn't either or.
Yeah, you get a few, like you might just be a case of my bloodline lets me change between a humanoid and a big bat, and that's it. That's why I'm a horrifying thing, because some people saw me turn into a big horrifying bat and they went, that's not right. Kill that. Kill that with fire. So yeah, it's not everything. We're just looking at a wide variety of choice. Okay, so happy with the forms. Nothing else we can really think of.
I think that's a good selection of forms that people could have access to.
Yeah. What about a shadow?
I feel like shadows are things that vampires would probably like spawn and summon, and
as opposed to turning into.
Yeah, as opposed to turning into. I suppose you could give them, not have them transform into a shadow, but you could give them like shadow step abilities.
Being able to move through darkness.
Being able to, yeah, you could give them abilities that are akin to that, rather than just having them transform into a shadow.
Please understand the following. Vampires turn into things. These things, the only way people can describe them as are like a wolf, but not like Uncanny Valley monsters. What's Uncanny Valley?
The Uncanny Valley is, it's like a chart where basically as things start to become more realistic, they reach a point where people find them very uncomfortable. So it's like, you know, it's like comfort and realistic, and it's like it goes up, and then right before things hit, they look really real. There's this massive dip. So it's called the Uncanny Valley. Which things like you know, like cyborg robots who you know, kind of look real but they don't. Uncanny Valley. So yeah, things that are like just not real enough to be slightly unsettling.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Didn't even show the picture that I wanted to see. I want to see this picture. Oh yeah, human likeness and familiarity. So right at 100% and right at the top is just a regular actual person.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have things like, you know, general robots, a humanoid-looking robot, stuffed animals. Then right at the bottom, you've got things like corpses, zombies, prosthetics, things that you look at and your brain is like, they're kind of a human, but I know they're not a human, and it just kind of like makes you feel really unsettled.
I guess that could work then.
So yeah, that's...
You turn into something that can take the stats of a direwolf or an owlbear, but you don't actually turn into one of those animals because that would be like a polymorph thing. I suppose that would make it more horrifying as well.
Yeah. Like you could argue that elves sort of, you know, occupy that.
Uncanny Valley, Mark Zuckerberg.
You could argue, you know, so that's a real woman and this is the robot that was based off of her. It's like when you see the two next to each other, you are just like, that's not real. Yeah, and you can tell. So you could argue that even elves might fall into the Uncanny Valley depending on your personal interpretation of like, they're too perfect. It's like how if you actually mirrored your face to be perfectly symmetrical, it just wouldn't look right because that's not how humans are.
Okay.
So that's what the Uncanny Valley is. It's just like ever so slightly something is wrong.
I like that then. I'd say keep that. So when they turn into a swarm of bats, it would be a case of if you were to isolate any one of these bats, they're not actually bats. They just look bat-like. You know, it doesn't correspond to, you could say, you know, this is a Sword Coast bat, famous for living in the caves around here. It's not, doesn't actually look like any bat that exists. I think that would be that's a cool sort of horrific trait to give them. These creatures they turn into, these are the closest approximations.
Yeah.
And that would work well with the wolf thing. You know, you know, why can they turn into wolves? Isn't that a Lycan thing? They're not actually wolves. It's a quadrupedal, canine-looking creature.
Yeah.
But it's
like
not
a death
actually,
dog.
Yeah, like a death dog, or like a, you know, Cerberus or whatever. It's like not actually a dog. You know, it's the closest thing to it, and it behaves like it, but it's not actually a dog. That works. Okay, let's move on to the forms then. So regardless of like which bloodline, even if you would take the bloodline that could turn into the most things, how many different forms do you think is enough?
I think if we're going to think of this from a gameplay player perspective, I feel like if you go, I think 3 is a good, reasonable number, and when you start
3 different forms,
3 different,
including human or not including human?
Including human. You could push to 4, I think, on certain bloodlines, but if you start to go into 5, I think there's like too much to track, and people won't use certain ones because they'll just like forget and be like, oh well, that one's throwaway. You know, when am I ever going to use that?
Okay, because I'm just thinking, we've done werewolves already, we've said that they can have 3 forms: animal, hybrid, and humanoid. If we keep it the same number, it seems a bit boring. So I would say probably go to 4.
I guess you could push to 4 then.
Push to 4. Maximum is what I mean. Maximum.
Yeah.
So there's one that can do. I mean, I suppose that would be like the Alucard bloodline then.
Yeah, because Alucard could transform into a lot of things.
And
That's...
technically, he turned into one bat.
One bat, a singular bat.
He was a singular.
Small bat.
No, as in like he turned into singular things. So it was a single wolf. Mist, you know, one sort of entity of mist. You couldn't spread.
I get that.
So that would be his bloodline thing of like, why can't you turn into multiple bats? Like, it's just not. It's not a thing we do. We don't spread into bats and then all reconvene and stuff like other ones. It's like I just turn into a bat.
Like in Discworld, when she turns into multiple bats, and Angwar's like, "What happens if all of the bats can't get together?" She's like, "You just feel like you've got a headache for a while. It's hard to explain."
Yeah, bat form. Symphony of the Night. I was hoping for more pictures. Images. Not seeing any bats in these images.
I'm guessing that's the relic of the bat.
There you go. Turns into one flying bat. So yeah, that would be a difference in the bloodline. And hey up, Core.
Hello. Aw, thank you for subbing, Core. Oh, and he's doing a health check for us. Have a drink, everybody. Oh.
Okay. So, moving on to this then. So if we would have monomorphic, bimorphic, trimorphic, and then I would suppose polymorphic.
Yeah, poly, which is just many. Multiple.
There we go. So, switch between 3 forms, switch between 3 forms, and then... Whoa, no. Switches between... many forms. Or would they have the same classifications? Because I'm looking more at this terminology from the point of view of like like a werewolf hunter or a vampire hunter. What would a vampire hunter have as specifications? If there's you got ones that can turn into 2, some that can turn into 3, some that can turn. Would they just have monomorphic and polymorphic? Just 2. It either doesn't change or it does change.
It's true.
Because with the amount of different forms they've got, it's like even if you say, oh, it's a trimorphic.
Which 3? Yeah.
Which 3?
Yeah.
That's the important question. Which 3 do they turn into? Be health, please. You are muted.
Who's muted? No, we're not. Our sound's coming through on the screen.
I feel like we're not muted because Das has been responding to the things that we've been saying.
Yeah, people have been responding to us the entire time.
Have you muted the stream? Because sometimes you can hear, like, whenever you tune in, you can hear blue twice then. Yeah, why am I talking if you're saying we're muted? You can't fucking hear us. It's the headphone incident all over again. What's the point? It wasn't not bother. It wasn't not be here. Why am I wearing headphones?
Why can I not hear the stream?
Anyway. Just need to type something to. Have you muted the stream or Google Chrome or Firefox in your sound settings? I don't know. I had to refresh. That was odd. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was about to say, maybe you should refresh.
Anyway, welcome back, Stoney.
Hey.
Yeah. So if we just say sod that.
Blow that for a game of soldiers.
Unlike werewolves, though, would we say that the minimum forms is humanoid? Because that's kind of the point.
Yes, I'd say that is the point.
So,
like how that humanoid looks can vary between your bloodline. As you said, you've got you've got the tenebrous ones.
Yes.
But that's still classified as a humanoid,
So,
kind of.
Monomorphic, humanoid form only. That's it. You know, whatever you look like is what you look like, but that's it. And then polymorphic is switches between many forms, one of which is humanoid.
Yes.
Now, for vampires then, unlike werewolves obviously have a trigger, but then once they've triggered, there's a trigger to then turn them off. Would we say that the forms for a vampire, to contrast that, would be they can't do it for very long?
Yeah, it's not their main thing. Whereas
they turn into it for a purpose. They do that purpose, and then they've got a time limit for it's like.
Yeah, I would say so because for a werewolf turning into a Lycan in your wolf form is literally your whole thing.
That's the thing.
So you don't want, as a player, it's like, well, should I be a werewolf or should I be a vampire? Well, I'll just be a vampire because a vampire can basically do everything a werewolf can.
Yeah.
You don't want that wishy-washiness.
So maybe it would be a case of some forms, because they're less strain on you or something, you can turn into them for like an hour maybe at most. That would be like the top end, but for most of them it's going to be like a minute.
Yeah, a minute.
You know, if you can't get whatever you need to be done as an owlbear like thing for a minute, you turn into something, you kill someone, you turn back.
Yeah, it basically, you could almost classify some of these as literally like transport forms of like you're not going to be attacking people as a swarm of bats. That's you trying to get away or travel somewhere.
Yeah. You travel through the party to get to the door.
Same with the mist and same with the spiders. It's like you're not going to be attacking people with these. This is for you to get somewhere.
I did think you could turn into like one big spider as well, because I know you hate them, but that's kind of the point. Why don't you want to go up against this one? Because he could turn into a big fucking spider. I don't like spiders. Call me when he's done the spider.
I know
thing.
it's because it's meant to be horrific, but also there's like I've never seen anything where that's a thing. Like, where does that come from?
Well, like Das says, they can turn into creatures of the night. And when you think of horror things, bats, wolves, spiders, they're just all the kind of classic trope horror things. I mean, you could argue ghosts, but I mean, mist kind of covers that.
Yeah.
If they're already undead, I turn into different undead.
Yeah,
Undead 2, Electric Boogaloo.
I mean, that's your argument. That was the same argument of like, can they turn into shadows? I was like, well, no, because they're already vampires.
Yeah.
They wouldn't turn into a shadow. They would have shadow-like abilities.
Yeah, so that's why I think, spider turns not like huge creature, but they would still turn even like a small one or like a medium spiders. Based on our size.
Yeah,
so
that's horrific.
Enough. Yeah, it doesn't need to be like a large or like a phase spider. Even though I can't get my head around phase spiders, I always thought they were tiny and they attacked in swarms, but evidently I got the wrong end of the stick on that. I prefer to be a vampiric werewolf pirate ninja.
Thanks, Ghoul.
Quality contribution as always. He does his health checks and then that's all he's good for.
We love you, Ghoul.
Except when you post wrong things in the channel and confuse the fuck out of me. I was looking at that Discord chat being like, I feel like I've turned over 2 pages at once, but it's just a constant stream and it just does not make sense. What have I missed? I've lost all control over Discord.
Brilliant.
Right.
Okay. Right. I'm going to go top up my glass because mine's empty.
Alright. I shall start making notes on this. Swarm of spiders, Mr. Frodo, and giant spider. We've got the new curses. What do we put up here as well? Transformation conditions. I'd argue that a vampire can do it at will. No, I never had control. I've been banished to the Shadow Realm in my own Discord. That's where we're at. So transformation conditions. I feel like for vampires, then it should be at will, but as I say, there's a time limit that is based on whatever form. Maybe we could do a time limit thing based on whatever spell slot they use. Maybe. I don't know. I suppose that way you say that all vampires would have spell slots. I mean, you probably have some of them where you could say that because they are a magical bloodline, they can spend spell slots to do it more often. That'd be a kind of, a unique trait thing, but for the most part, they just have you can do this once per short rest or whatever. Let's put in then, so by default, vampires can transform into one of their animal, beast, one of the beasts, yeah, beastly forms at will, but they remain in that form for a limited time. Some bloodlines can for a limited time, once a form being transformed into, cannot do so again until they have rested. And then we can put the specifics on whether it's a short rest or a long rest or whatever. Some bloodlines can expend spell slots to regain use of certain forms. Maybe not necessarily all forms, but obviously we can get down to the noodliness of that later on. Now then, this should be a good one. Let's do weaknesses. What would it be? Well, yeah, because I was thinking weaknesses and like mortal weaknesses, like what are the things that they're vulnerable to, and then what are things that will kill them. I suppose you could just put those. Usually, them two things fall together. Like a stake in the heart, either paralyzes or kills them. Which, I mean, if you paralyzed it and you're that close, you've basically killed it. For argument's sake, running water does extra damage, but then will eventually kill them. So I suppose, yeah, weakness is just a kind of catch-all term for everything. Made to charge recklessly at monsters with dual blades and make stupid jokes, then I'm all out of dual blades. Use fish. Weaknesses, and then I suppose the next obvious one is going to be strengths. So classic weaknesses we've got is stake to the heart. Is that the correct stake? Am I being stupid? No, it's not. It's oops. Stake to the heart. I never have to spell stake. Yeah, S-T-A-Q. Yeah. I've never had to write that word down. Stake to the heart. Paralysis or death. Holy water. Holy water I feel like would be in greater supply in the D&D world because there's a lot more gods, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be a good god, it could just be the god of I hate vampires. So holy water, not holy water. Silver I still believe. Or silvered weapons. Well, even just contact with silver in general I believe. Silver is a weakness to them. I feel like I've heard of one from like old European folklores of like salt and iron. Why is that ringing the bells? I feel like I got that from my mum bought me some books. The one's called, because my name online is Spook, bought me a book called The Spook's Apprentice, And I believe Salt and Iron as a weakness was in that. Have you heard of that, love?
What are we talking about?
Salt and Iron as a weakness to, like, Fae and Fiends.
Yes,
and
to
stuff.
Fae, yeah, definitely, 100%.
Salt and Iron, okay.
Salt and Iron, very common for Fae.
Would you say that that could be a weakness for Lycanthropy then, or have I got the kind of wrong mythos? I remember it for like witches, because you remember have you seen the books? I've got the Spook's Apprentice that Mum got me. It's part of the training for the Spook's Apprentice in that he learns how to use Salt and Iron, and I believe it's on witches. It was a long time ago that I read one of those books, but I believe it was for witches that was the main use of it. But, you know, everyone's open to their own.
I know, and there's loads of different interpretations. Again, it comes down to things like, you know, different plants, like, you know, it ties back to old, you know, Druidism in, you know, the Celts and stuff.
Yeah.
They believe that, you know, like, oak trees are, you know, powerful things, and, you know, willow trees do different things and things like that. So it all harks back to that. Like the whole mirror thing for vampires is silver again, because back in old days mirrors were silvered, so silver was technically a weakness for both vampires and werewolves.
I'd say probably not iron and salt them for a vampire, because you could say, well, my weapon's iron. It kind of defeats the point of having to silver your weapon if you can just iron your weapon. So, yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've heard of it for Fae. I've never heard of it for vampires.
Running water.
Yes, have heard of running water.
Running water is a go-to one.
What if you put the water in a bath? Is it running then? Shut up!
They have to keep getting out of the bath every time they want to turn it on and put more water in, and then they close it and then they get back in. Stagnant water.
Yeah, do you remember in Castlevania? I feel like I would know if running water would kill me by now. Dracula's just there in the background, gradually getting angrier and angrier.
What other weakness? I'll tell you what, I've got the monster manual here. Let's see what it says in the old monster manual for the vampire. Oh, the correct page!
Wild.
What have we got then? Regeneration.
Strad there.
Strad spider climb. See, they've got a spider climb in this. See, they can turn into spiders. Shut up, you.
That's not what the spell spider climb
It doesn't matter! Shut them up! Vampire weakness. The vampire has the following flaws. Forbiddance. Can't enter a structure. That's a weird one. Not being able to enter a structure.
Again, it's just a classic thing of vampires can't enter structures if they're uninvited.
Sunlight.
Oh, yeah. Duh.
Too obvious. Too obvious.
Obvious one.
Sunlight.
Again, I don't know if that's something that, again, has come back from the old thing of them being associated with nobles, and that, you know, nobles would consider it rude to enter a place uninvited, and the two just kind of got woven together.
Maybe, yeah, forbiddance. So, I mean, we'll put that under weaknesses, but I mean, actually, for a player character, that would be annoying as hell.
Yeah.
I want to go to the shop. I stand outside the door. May I come in? Yes, sir. Thank God.
Thank you.
And then eventually, when weird things start to happen, someone goes, hang on a minute.
Hang on a minute. That's when it gets really irritating, like if you're trying to run away from something and the party just like freaking books it through its tavern, and then the person who's the vampire in the party just suddenly skids to a halt, and they're like, guys, come back, and you need to, guys!
Don't leave me alone, or you have to shout for like the tavern owner's just buggered off, and you just shouting after him, can I come in? And he's like not even listening to you because he's just running, and you're like, well, I've got to go around the building.
Somebody runs halfway through the building, they turn around and have to come back and go, you can come in.
Is there anything else? Chained to the grave, remains bound to a coffin, crypt or grave site. Yeah, we know about that. Yeah, nothing else about weaknesses then necessarily in there. Okay, let's think outside of the box then. Further weaknesses if we're thinking along the lines of like Gulthias as a vampire. A plant-based one. Susceptibility to fire. Although it's not specifically put, wasn't one of his vulnerabilities, was it? Or wasn't, because I wasn't looking in that.
It wasn't that he himself was a plant. It was his blood spawned these plants.
But that's what I mean, though. So if you're from a bloodline that's directly linked to Gulthias, that will kind of carry over.
Was it on the Blight page? It's Gulthias specifically referenced on the Blight page.
So, yeah. There's no vulnerabilities or anything to fire in there. The D section is so big in the monster manual. Demons, devils, and dragons. Oh my. Cambion. Beholder, right.
Behold!
Blight.
Yeah, the flavour text is on this one.
Yeah, but they don't actually have a... the twig ones do. But the vine and the needle blights do not have a vulnerability to fire. Okay. Where's Gulthias? Roots of the Gulthias tree. Legends tell of a vampire named Gulthias who worked terrible magic and raised up an abominable tower called Nightfang's Spire. Gulthias was undone when a hero plunged a wooden stake through his heart, but as the vampire was destroyed, his blood infused the stake with a dreadful power. In time, tendrils of new growth sprout from the wood, growing into a sapling infused with the vampire's evil essence. It is said that a mad druid discovered the sapling, transplanting it to an underground grotto where it could grow. From this Gulthias tree came the seeds from which the first blights were sown.
There you go. So it is a slightly different story from what you first thought. You first thought it was his blood spilled on the ground, but the blood infused with the stake that he was killed with. Very interesting.
So that would be a thing, because I originally thought then that because Gulthias was plant-based, that a stake to the heart wouldn't do anything to him. But I suppose it would be the opposite of, like, if a person from that lineage is killed by a stake, maybe now the ramifications of that is that they turn into some sort of blight form. Maybe they could have a blight form, but it's only triggerable upon death. If you're killed in that particular way, because Gulthias died however many thousands of years ago that you want to say, that sort of tradition is now carried on.
Maybe you could make it a little bit like a troll. How, like, if you cut off a troll's limbs, it doesn't matter; it just regenerates.
Regenerates like in a plant form. And
yeah,
then it goes back to normal
so
form.
you could say that it may be a case of, like, it looks like a stake to the heart kills it, but actually it doesn't. It just grows back. Or or the blood infusing with the stake, that stake grows into a new vampire.
Yeah, that could be something that's quite cool.
So it's like, again, it could be one of those things where it's like, well, you need a vampire hunter who knows what they're doing, because if you have someone who's like, well, it's a vampire, so you just stake them to the heart, it's like, actually, because it's a Gulthias vampire, that doesn't actually kill them.
What about then, instead, if you get staked to the heart, that's what triggers you into the other form? It's like a switch. So you've not actually killed them, you've just turned them into the other form, and now they have blight abilities, where they could probably spawn more blights around you or something, or they now have access to, like, controlling the ground and stuff.
Yeah, they get plant magic.
That'd be quite nasty, This will kill him. That made it worse.
You've unlocked my second form!
Yeah.
Boss music goes into a higher key.
So White Wolf has a spider-based bloodline. Also, there are vampire spiders IRL.
I'm not Googling that.
No, I don't blame. There we go. But we've learned something else. So those are the only two vampires that I know of from the D&D universe, which is Strahd and Gulthias. I don't know much about Strahd, though. I don't think there's anything that's sort of said of how he's different. In 5th edition, I should say.
I mean, short of reading Curse of Strahd, but obviously we didn't do that for obvious reasons, because it was being run for us.
A brilliant thinker and capable warrior in life, Strahd von Zarovich fought in countless battles for his people. When war and killing finally stripped him of his youth and strength, he settled in the remote valley of Barovia and built a castle and a towering pinnacle from which he could survey his lands. His brother Sergei came to live with him in Castle Ravenloft, becoming Strahd's advisor and constant companion. In his brother, Strahd saw everything he had lost. Sergei was handsome and young, while Strahd had become old and scarred. Resentment coloured their relationship, eventually turning into hatred. Strahd's beloved, Tatiana, spurned him for Sergei, whom she pledged to marry. In a desperate attempt to win Tatiana's heart, Strahd forged a pact with dark powers that made him immortal. At the wedding of Sergei and Tatiana, he confronted his brother and killed him. Tatiana fled and flung herself from Ravenloft's walls. Strahd's guards, seeing him for a monster, shot him with arrows, but he did not die. He became a vampire, the first vampire according to many sages. In the centuries since his transformation, Strahd's lust for life and youth have only grown. He broods in his dark castle, cursing the living for stealing away what he lost and never admitting his hand in the tragedy he created.
Ooh.
So Strahd basically kind of is Dracula.
Yeah, Strahd is 5e's Dracula.
5e's in D&D's Dracula.
Yeah, essentially.
Essentially, yeah. So okay, learn some new. Hey, look who's in the
there
chat.
He is.
The Swedish Viking has arrived. I haven't been able to say that in years. Yes.
He misses it.
Literally, yes. I think he's pronounced on it Strahd. I really wish there was a canonical version of the Count in D&D 5th edition. 1 death saving throw. Ah.
Stop it! Stop peeking my microphone.
Identical to but legally distinct D&D Dracula. Yeah, from that story, that kind of fits what I believe from.
Yeah, that'll have been back when. I mean, when was Strahd first created? Jesus, how old actually is he in terms of?
If he was around in first,
he was in first edition.
1970s then, so you're talking 50 years old. D&D is old.
There's literally artwork here from first edition, so yeah, he's been in the game since the beginning.
Yeah.
Just look at that!
Oh, Blight, we've also got Gargoyle. Did you put Gargoyle? No, Gargoyle.
Oh, sorry.
Gargoyle 4. That would be a cool thing.
So when did you say first edition was first made?
I believe it was 1970. Dumb.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons. Barbarian only edition. You're just Dracula, aren't you? No. I have a dog. Dracula doesn't have a dog. Ha.
Can I copy your homework? Yeah, but change it a little so it doesn't look the same.
Editions of Dungeons and Dragons, yeah.
1974.
Okay, I was a little bit too early. Stoker did not.
When did Dracula enter the public domain? 1962. So it was public domain, but that probably doesn't matter. Gargoyle still probably thought, I want to have a Dracula, but it's not Dracula.
Fair enough.
I'm going to have hobbits in my game, but they're not called hobbits.
Yeah. No, they did originally call them hobbits, didn't they? That was a legal thing. They had to change that one.
Anyway.
Although apparently I heard sort of rumour on Grapevine that Gygax was not actually a big fan of the Lord of the Rings.
No, I've heard that before as well.
He wasn't a big fan of that world, like the fantasy that was involved in that. He had a very different idea on how he wanted, or how he thought medieval fantasy should play out. So, interesting. And yet he still took the name Hobbits. I don't like this. Gonna read it anyway. Okay, so weaknesses then. Can you think of any other ones? Any other vampire weaknesses? Based on what we've got so far of being able to change into like... I feel like fire could be on the table.
Fire could be on there, yeah.
And it's a good go-to trope of like,
burn it.
Yeah, burn it with fire.
Yeah.
What do humans do when they don't know how to deal with something? Burn it with
fire. Burn the heretics!
Yeah, just burn everything. If it can survive fire with garlic?
Yeah, garlic, which again is certain plants.
Garlic, yeah.
Holy symbols. People would hold up the cross to...
I've put holy water.
You could group the two together. Religious iconography.
I feel like in D&D that's a lot easier to come by holy symbols.
True.
You just hold up like a freaking key ring and jangle it.
Yeah, because in 5e especially, it's like...
Right! That is an incredibly freaking aesthetic vampire, isn't it? What did you do? I hurt his pride and he was defeated. I bested him.
It's just a battle of wits.
Oh, God.
Please.
Death by pride.
Please, this isn't a barbarol. Have some class.
Okay, so let's move on to strengths. What are some... So...
Immortality is the primary one.
Not including immortality, because that is the defining thing of being a vampire. It's like saying, why do you want to be a werewolf? You can transform. Yes, we know that one.
We know that.
She goes free. Yes, we know that one. Anything else? Pirates of the Caribbean was such a good film. Anyway, a battle of wits, and you, sir, are unarmed. Cut out his tongue. Strength. So strength, literally superhuman
super strength.
So
speed can fall under that as well.
Super strength. Super speed, dexterity to transform it. I suppose super fortitude. When you see them fighting, you do see them often getting like with Strahd. he gets shot by a lot of arrows, but he doesn't die. So even though he's immortal in the sense of like he can't age to death, he can still take a punishment.
Yeah.
He's obviously got, and he has regeneration.
Yeah, regeneration and vitality.
So but essentially super stats is the sort of catch-all for that. Super stats, super ability scores. To put it into a D&D term, super ability scores. Everything goes up a bit, but on different levels. Some are smarter, maybe some are wiser because of like feral perception, better smell or better hearing. Hearing would be a good one because of big, pointy ears like a
night
bat.
night vision, that kind of thing.
Night vision, yeah. They'd be easily goaded. You can't even fly. You just glide. What? Of course I can fly. Watch me. Sets trap while he's whizzing about. Yeah, immortal does not equal invulnerable.
Yes,
that is the clarification. You know, I wish for immortality. Cool. Bang. Why am I dying? You didn't look in the dictionary, sir. The dictionary would have saved your life here. So yeah. So super ability scores. What other benefits would there be to being a vampire?
Flight.
Can vampires naturally fly?
Some. I've seen some of them do that.
How? Is it just literally just magic?
I think it's just magic.
They can just choose to fly.
Some obviously transform into forms, but I believe I've seen bits of media where vampires do just kind of levitate.
Okay, so we'll put in...
yeah, if you could call it levitation instead of flight if you wanted to.
Well, innate flight.
Yeah.
However you want to determine that, whether it's gliding, whether it's whatnot.
Yeah. Charming.
They just become sexy. What?
You know, again, this 5e brain, they have the charm ability, but in general, vampires seem to be able... hypnosis.
Influential.
Yeah, influence. Yeah. There's all sorts of words that you could call it.
Charismatic and influential. That's all. Influential.
Yeah.
I suppose that would kind of work, if you're back in the day and you're like, what do you want? And you know that back then especially who you knew was power. If you could influence nobility, you were set for life. That was, you can't touch me because I've influenced all the people around me. So
hell, look at the episode that we watched.
Yeah,
that we watched. They went and charmed Uriel Taldori so that he would leave them alone. That was their entire shtick.
Not strength, but lack of reflection. I'd argue that is a weakness easily identified. Yeah, it's what I was hinting at. English bad.
Thanks, Benji. It's not a weakness, but it's a tell.
It's a tell. I suppose you could tie it to weakness, though, of, ties to fiends. Because that was also a fiend thing, wasn't it? Because, like you said, silver was meant to be an antithesis of evil.
Yeah, it was.
So anything that was evil, technically anything that was evil didn't show reflection. Technically, by their terminology.
Yeah, because back then, anything that was reflective was more often than not made of silver.
Yeah.
They silvered mirrors and silver rings and things like that.
So I'll put under weakness though, lack of reflection, because it's worth putting in there. That especially for a player character, not so much for an NPC, because it's like when you go to fight a vampire, there's that would be a tell of why don't we see any mirrors in this place? That's a tell, but it's not guaranteed to be a sign. But for a player character, when you're walking around, the DM can put mirrors fucking everywhere. Everywhere you go to, there's mirrors, and you're like, I have to avoid the room with mirrors. Every time you go in, I check for traps. I check for mirrors. Mirror check.
Yep.
Roll a perception check. Why do I need to roll a perception check? Wouldn't I be able to see my... Natural one. You don't see any mirror.
That's not a mirror, that's just a bit of wall.
It's not your painting, it's rubbish. Yeah, Stanley can't use the bad English because he's just bad at all languages. He just can't talk. Lack of reflection, so obviously makes you easily identifiable. Mm-hmm. Any other tropes that we can think of? I had one for strength, but I can't now remember what it was.
I mean, you've kind of grouped all of that under super ability scores.
So yeah, that's 6. 7 for the innate flight, charismatic and influential. The immortalities are given. I did have another one, but I can't. Natural weapons.
Oh
but
yeah,
could you put that under strength? Why else would you want claws if you're going to be weak? The whole point of, I've given you claws. Sweet, not much good if I'm not very strong. Because someone will still just grab my arm and break my hand.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, for the sake of this list, you don't want to group it under it because if we were to make a stat block, it would have its own thing. So think of it like that.
Okay.
Like, you know, claws would be listed as its own thing. So.
Tail? I don't really think of vampires having tails, do they?
Don't really think of it, no.
Horns?
And that's the, like, fiendish crossover. You could, if you made a bloodline that was slightly more fiendish in nature, then you could. You could make that a potential trait. Again, keen senses is a different ability from ability scores.
Keen senses, alright.
Yeah. Life drain, in the sense that, you know, obviously they could draw blood, but you said yourself that in that article that you read about that old school type of vampire, it just sort of said drained the life essence, which could mean anything.
Yeah, that was another point that I'd looked at as well. Of technically, I would put in the ranking that vampires are more powerful than werewolves, but only if they've recently and fully fed.
Yeah.
And then they're on like a time limit that ticks down, and like if they haven't fed for a while, although they won't die, essentially they will reach the point where they basically just don't have any of their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
They're not super strong, they're not super fast because they've not fed. So you're now just, you're immortal, but you're basically just a regular dude.
Yeah. Or you're just like a walking corpse at that point.
Exactly, yeah. Because you've been so long without blood. So then a werewolf would easily just destroy you, because a werewolf just goes, I transform and I beat the fuck out of you. But a vampire that has just fed is like uber powerful and like, you know, almost godlike in comparison to a normal person. So I would put in there gain power through feeding, because that would be something as well. Of, you know, like I want to be powerful. Okay, you are powerful, but you got to put some work in.
Yeah.
To gift, you have the option. Other people don't have the option.
Is that a strength or is it a weakness?
A weakness to your humanity, but
yeah. If you get you know, people who are playing evil characters, it's like, oh, if you want to be powerful, you'll have to kill all these people, and they'll just go and.
Yeah. Okay.
For some players, that kind of thing is not a detriment.
No, but then if you say, okay, but as the, you know, because of that, you are now weak to direct sunlight, you will, within a few seconds, burn away into nothingness. That could be unfortunate. I live on the surface. We have 12 hours of these things. That's a long time to be not doing a lot of stuff. Yeah, natural weapons as opposed to claws. That was the terminology I was thinking of. Natural weapons, because then you can put in maybe tails, maybe horns.
Yeah.
You know, other things.
You've got options.
We've got to remember this is a D&D vampire, not just our vampires. In a world where you have already a lot of weird shit going on, to then put vampires into them, you have to base it off of all the other weird shit as well. So that could be collective. So yeah, natural weapons is
blood craze, if they haven't fed in a while, and if they enter a blood haze if they've just fed. That's something you can note down.
Blood frenzy, that would be a weakness, because that's not something that you want. Blood frenzy, you want control.
At that point, you have lost control. Yeah, magic, just in general, you could say. Yeah.
Yeah.
5e vampires do have spellcasting in their stat block, but obviously it will vary from bloodline to bloodline.
I was saying way before you were here that by default vampires can transform into one of their beastly forms at will, but they remain in that form for a limited time. Once a form has been transformed into, they can't do so again until they have rested. So you can change that between short and long. And then some bloodlines can expend spell slots to regain use of certain forms. That would be a specific one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I like that.
So not all vampires can do spellcasting, and not all vampires that can do spellcasting can use them for forms.
Yeah.
But maybe one specific one can. Maybe a druidic one.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, and it can be a case of like, what happens if you have a barbarian who gains, vampirism and gains some spellcasting from that. It's like, this bloodline you can do stuff using spell slots. It's like, well, I'm a vampire, I'm a barbarian, I didn't have spell slots to start with. Well, it's like, okay, well, now you've gained a couple of spell slots, but technically you can only use them for this.
Yeah, because you don't know spells, but you have spell slots.
Yeah. If you want to sit and learn spells, talk to your DM about it. Now you've got a spell slot, you can, maybe learn a spell or two. But again, purple box, ask your DM.
Yeah.
We're not rewriting the entire game yet.
Are they susceptible to puns, like if a vampire says they're craving a little Indian or Thai, it means something different? I could murder a cup of coffee. Let's open a window, it's getting kind of warm. Okay.
Yeah, the dryer's on.
I'd say that's enough variety for strengths, if I could speak.
Yeah, we've got quite a few there.
Okay. So let's go back to
Going back again.
classifications.
Gotta go back, Marty.
Marty, we gotta go back. So yeah, Tenebris, which is the one that I found, which I Pigeon Latin translated, which I do with all of my D&D stuff. I just Pigeon Latin translate it, or Pigeon Swedish. I just type in a word and then it tells me the word in English, and I go, that sounds cool to me, because I can't pronounce it, so it would work.
Done.
Yep, done it with a lot of things. Brilliant. Yeah, these are apparently the earliest forms of vampirism from our own history, back before we had the sort of Bram Stoker or the Camilla variants of like these sort of noble, highborn people with pale skin that feasted on blood. These were more like, I'd say more like zombies in a way.
Yeah.
They were kind of more zombified people, but they weren't like dumb. They were still people. They just, were horrible, nasty people who ate other people. Cannibals. They were cannibals.
Yeah.
I really hope there is not racially insensitive stuff within that history. It doesn't mention anything to do with it, but because it says dark skinned, I'm hoping that it meant like the purple from all the blood that they were consuming.
Yeah, if it said that it was purple, because that says to me that it's like bruised.
Yeah.
That sort of,
Bruised
if,
and rotting kind
when
of
you get like really, really badly hit with something, all the blood vessels kind of like swell up a little bit.
So I'm hoping that's what it means, and it's not something else, because that's not cool.
Vampire.
Yeah, cause mischief or deaths in neighbourhoods they inhabited while they were alive. They wore shrouds and were often described as bloated and of ruddy or dark countenance, markedly different from today's gaunt, pale vampire, which dates from the early 19th century, which is Bram Stoker's.
A shroud could be something that we mention. A shroud is essentially like a...
They mean shroud as in the...
Oh, a death shroud,
a
right.
cloak, not as in like a misty stuff around them. Where was it that I read? Was it down here? The word vampire, folk beliefs. Yeah, vampires are usually reported as bloated in appearance and ruddy, purplish or dark in colour. These characteristics were often attributed to the recent drinking of blood.
Yeah.
That's horrific and cool. So we're okay with that. Okay. You could call them Tenebrisian if you want a demonym for it, if you're being loose with the Latin anyway. Tenebrisian.
Yeah, just taking the word tenebris and put Isian on the end.
What's tenebris? Tenebris.
Tenebris is what you've written there. Tenebris, dark.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's basically making up a word for it, like how you have, like how you have Kanto Pokemon that are Kantoan. You just kind of stick a thing on the end.
It's done.
Tenebrisian.
And we'll just put that as dark vampires. Because back in the day, if these are going to be like the only horrific things you've ever seen, it's like, what was it? It was a dark vampire.
Yeah,
it's not like the other vampires I've seen. What was different about it? It was dark. And that's just how you categorize things. Yeah, all right. Tenebrisian vampires. And then we've obviously got the true vampires, which are going to be whichever version of vampirism you want. These are going to be your best ones. These are going to be your highest, most powerful. Even when they're weak, they're still powerful.
Clad in the linen shroud it was buried in, its teeth, hair and nails may have somewhat grown, though in general fangs were not a feature. I guess that's because obviously when you die, your nails and hair keep growing, so that's where that's come from.
So what other vampires do you reckon we could think of them? Kind of bloodlines. Blighted vampires?
Yeah, I think, you keep mentioning Gulthias and the Blighted one, so I think that could be something that you make. Since it's something that already exists in D&D history.
Blighted vampires? Okay.
Well, if you want to use the name, call them Gulthias vampires.
I mean, we could do. I'm just thinking so that it's translatable for everybody's world. People might have read that and they might go, it's cool, but it's not what I had in mind. Maybe in their world it's like, there is only one vampire.
Right.
And then they can just look through and they can go, actually, I think that one's kind of cool. Or they might say, I want a blighted one, but I don't specifically want it to come from Gulthias. So you can just be like, well, it's basically him. We've just not labelled it as such. So blighted vampires. What else can we think of? Maybe sacrilege ones, like unholy ones.
Yeah, like
specifically, not just they're weak to good things as all things are in the D&D universe, because smite is a thing, but specifically like fiendish vampires.
Yeah, I was thinking the demonic vampires.
Heretical.
Yeah.
Heretical.
Heretical vampire. You could call that sort of like your brackets demonic vampires, perhaps.
Heretical vampires.
They're the ones that could potentially have horns and things.
So fiendish.
Fiendish vampire.
Because that's the that encompasses both demons, devils, and Yugoloths, which could also work. I always love old drawings.
It looks so silly, don't it? It looks so dumb. Oh, look at that bit. They got like the cutest bat.
Rats. Changing to rats.
Oh right.
What?
You just sort of went rats, and I was like,
yeah.
And
swarm of rats. What? Jesus. Giant rat. That'd be a good one for a sort of lower sect, or a generation type thing. I don't know, that you can, the higher ones can turn into more sophisticated animals. What do you turn into? Rat.
I'm a rat.
Squeak, squeak for the mucker. Hedonistic vampire. They only care about enjoying themselves and feeding. Very low. Hedonistic. I know that word, but. Engaged in the pursuit of pleasure, essentially self-indulgent. Would that be classified like a bloodline? I suppose it could be, because there are often tales of people who are just so unbelievably vain and selfish they care about no one but themselves. You could put that into old history of someone saw them one day and said, "Stop that."
Yeah, that ties into the idea of feeding on people. It's
living off the working class. Well, now you're going to do it forever. Yeah, hedonistic. I like that, and it's a good word.
Or hedonistic. I don't know how you pronounce any of these words.
It's down to place.
Yeah.
Down to where you come from.
Place.
Fuck off. Turns out talking to witnesses who are peasants who don't know left from right, they're unlikely to be vampiric scholars. It was a dark thing, sire, not... Oh yes, sire, it was a Tenebrison vampire from the Southern Highlands. I dated one of them when I was in university. So you got selfish ones, fiendish ones, blighted ones. What else could we have?
Hedonistic. Fair enough.
Hedonistic is how I've always pronounced it. What about to use kind of like vampire spawn, not like a swarm type vampire? They're not specifically mega strong themselves, but they're a swarm type vampire. Maybe they could spread via.
That's kind of similar to what you've kind of written for these dark vampires, these Tenebrisian ones.
But these ones I've put down are meant to be the lowest of the low, because they don't really... They do technically convert, but because they just eat everything, they rarely grow into groups. I'm talking one that the whole point is it goes around, it bites somebody, doesn't really drain a lot, and moves to the next person. They just try and spread.
Oh, they're just trying to spread it as much as possible.
They're just trying to spread
like
the plague.
Like a plague
exactly,
vampire.
Yeah, plague vampire. That'd be quite... That's, horrifying. Why don't you want the plague vampire to come? Because when they arrive, you've got about 5 seconds before everyone's turned into a vampire, and then we've got a problem on our hands.
Yeah.
A swarm. And that's why they're not very... Why they're not very powerful, because they don't, feed until they're full. The whole point is they bite someone, turn them into one of themselves, and then obviously it doesn't work because you can't drain one of your own, because... Vampires, don't vampires canonically not have blood or something? That's why they drink it.
Yeah, that's something that I've heard before.
Or their blood is very sort of crap. Chat, fact check me on that. You invited a plague vampire? Yeah, they always bring a party.
God damn it.
So what would we call a swarm? A swarm vampire.
Is calling it a plague vampire too on the nose, or?
Well, plague vampire might. Well. Actually, swarms of flies and stuff, literally like pestilence.
There you go, a pestilent vampire.
Pestilent vampires. And then we can add insects. Swarm of...
Yeah, they can have a swarm of insects as their shape.
Giant insects. Yeah. Why not? Why not? Ghoul vampire? What would a ghoul vampire's... a ghoulish bloodline... What would that add? Like
a ghostly bloodline, really leaning into the undead aspect of it.
Yeah, an incorporeal one. That could be interesting. Why can't I spell tonight? Yeah, an incorporeal vampire. Its humanoid form. You could. It's like it's still a humanoid form. Follows the same rules we put in, but they can just walk through walls. They still look like a human.
A ghoul is a term to describe a minion created when a vampire gives a bit of vampiric vitae to a mortal without draining him or her of blood first, which would create another vampire instead.
Yeah, he hangs out in a catacomb and stuff. Because ghouls are their own thing in D&D. What does 5th edition's ghouls look like? Because I do always forget the undead.
I mean, they literally have a picture of like a weird creature gnawing on an arm as the artwork.
There's a lot of creatures that begin with G, which I don't remember. Grimlock, hags. Oh yes.
Yeah. Galen depicted the ghoul as a monstrous creature that dwelled in cemeteries, feasting upon corpses. This definition of the ghoul has persisted until modern times, with ghouls appearing in literature, television, film, as well as video games. Kind of like a golem, basically, says Simon.
Yeah.
There he is.
Ghast and ghouls, right.
Have a read.
Ghouls roam the night in packs, driven by an insatiable hunger for humanoid flesh. Like maggots or carrion beetles, ghouls thrive in places rank with decay and death. A ghoul haunts a place where it can gorge on dead flesh and decomposing organs. When it can't feed on the dead, it pursues living creatures and attempts to make corpses of them. Ghouls trace their origins to the Abyss. Dorosane, the first of their kind, was an elf whisperer of Orcus. Turning against his own people, he feasts on humanoid flesh to honour the demon prince of undeath. So, in this one, they're not specifically anything to do with vampires.
Yeah, but that's just 5e's interpretation.
That's what I mean, that's 5e's interpretation, but... When Orcus would not intervene in his heart, Dorosane turned to the elf gods for salvation, and they took pity on him and helped him escape certain destruction. Since then, elves have been immune to the ghoul's paralytic touch. Interesting. Oh yeah, if the target is a creature other than an elf or an undead.
That's an interesting loophole. I've never known that.
Wow.
That's an interesting loophole.
Golem, basically. Okay, scratch that name. Bad idea. I mean, it's not a bad idea. It's
not a bad idea.
In our history, it works, but because in D&D, they're like, we want a lot of undead, so we're going to put... There's a difference between spectres, banshees, ghosts, wraiths, poltergeists. These are all like...
I'm surprised there isn't a poltergeist stat block.
There is.
Is there?
It's an alternative for a spectre, I think.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's like Spectre Plus. You know, it's like it does other things. But this is what I mean. Because they wanted to put so many different things in, they're like, just take every name, and even though all of these names
kind
in our
of
history mean the same thing. Yeah. You know, they all mean the same thing to us, but in this universe, it's like, well, we need a name for all 7 of these creatures. So, yeah, for us, it would work as a ghoul vampire, but in D&D, we're going to have to change. Otherwise, it'll be a bit confusing, because then it'll be like, so is it a ghoul? Is it a ghoul vampire? Is it a vampire? These 3 things on the same level.
Which is it?
So pestilent vampire, but I like the incorporeal one. That's a cool bloodline. I think the ability to just be like walk through walls, because that would also include your levitation.
Yes.
They just move in the 3rd dimension. They can just move around. And that's what makes them terrifying.
They move via the ethereal plane.
Maybe that's a thing of like the forbiddance for them is like a big thing, because they can move through walls. The only thing that stops them coming to get you is to hide in your house. Or are they the ones that don't have forbiddance and they just move everywhere? And that's why they're terrifying?
Maybe they're the loophole one.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe all of these different vampire types are all loopholes, but for different things.
Yeah. It's cool. Limbo vampire. They just walk like the chiropractors from The Simpsons.
Or do you mean Limbo the plane?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, Limbo is a plane, but that's like elements and stuff in D&D. Again, Limbo is not something we think of as being with the elements from our own. So if you're stuck in limbo, you're just kind of stuck in limbo.
Limbo the plane.
Oh, right.
Limbo is the outer plane of the Great World cosmology that represents chaotic neutral alignment.
It's all about the elements, though, is Limbo. because it's where, excuse me,
the ever-changing chaos of limbo.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It has a slightly different meaning to what we think of. Like limbo in D&D is kind of the ethereal plane.
Yeah.
Not really, but it's kind of, it's that sort of space between the alive and dead kind of thing, which the outer planes is sort of meant to be also kind of the afterlife. It's kind of weird in D&D. They don't really have that kind of plane where you go to where it's like you're not quite dead but you're not quite alive, other than the ethereal plane. Because limbo is all about the elements. That's going to be a Githzerai or something, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
All he knows is Gith lore, everybody.
Well, that's what I don't know why, but that's what they did. The Githzerai just said, "Let's go. Come on, lads. I know an even rainier place." Why?
Living in the astral plane is pretty shitty, but don't worry, guys. I've got a better idea. Moves to limbo.
Ethereal vampire doesn't really have the kind of bite to it as like a pestilent vampire or a hedonistic vampire, a heretical vampire. Those have cool names.
It's
Ethereal
true.
vampire is just a bit kind of limp-wristed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need another name for essentially an incorporeal vampire.
Yeah. Again, spectral is maybe there, but a spectre is a creature, so I don't know.
Spectral vampire.
Is that different enough?
I'd argue it could be.
Mm-hmm.
Spectral vampire.
Oh yeah, the Slard also live in limbo.
You mean a bitey ghost? Fuck off! I have a Hoover.
Are we confusing this with werewolves again?
Maybe.
Just get the vampire out, and it goes, it's a vacuum, no!
Call it spectral.
Noisy!
Spectral vampires, which are incorporeal. Maybe that's how you can tell with spectral vampires. They don't shake hands or anything because they don't actually have a form.
Yeah. They just...
When they sit down, they technically just float. They just float in a sort of
maybe they need to feed in order to ground themselves to the material plane.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So like, for them, getting weaker is not all bad. Because once they've drained blood, they become more physical, and they sort of, or like they can still walk through walls, but it has a cost. Like there's, like how if you have the ability, incorporeal beings in D&D, if they move through a wall, if they stop in the wall, they take damage. So maybe it's one of them. If they've fed, they can still go through walls, but they can't stop in between. There's like a limit to it, or there's only so much they can move through. Whereas when they're weakened, they can just go wherever they want because they've sort of lost physicality. That's cool. Makes vampires interesting, which is what we want to do.
And you can easily write a bit of a lore thing for it as well, just to be like, well, because they're kind of essentially split between planes by taking on the life essence of something from the material plane, it grounds them to the material plane more.
And maybe if they've not fed for a while, they can move up and down, whereas if they've fed, they're subject to gravity. Yeah. So it's not as easy. They actually levitate.
Real, in a sense.
They have to actually levitate to try. Yeah, that's cool. So
they have to strike a balance of like, if they go too far, they won't be able to interact with anything.
Because they will just become essentially ghosts. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Write that down.
So spectral vampires, I'm just going to put as a bullet point because kind of tied to ethereal plane. Actually, I thought that would hotkey me a bullet point. There we go. Kind of tied to the ethereal plane. When they have not fed for a while, they can freely move through objects as well as innately fly / levitate.
Yeah.
Because it kind of looks the same. If they have fed, they lose some of this incorporealness. And that is a word. Pestilent vampires, let's just put some bullet points in for this so that we don't forget.
Insect plagues.
Carriers of actual plagues.
Mm-hmm. They aim to spread as much vampirism as possible. Some says insatiable hunger.
For pestilent,
Yeah.
Insatiable hunger. Yeah. Could nab some stats from the Ghost-Faced Killer Prestige class from 3.5. That was a class? I'm
It's
a Ghost-Faced Killer.
Prestige class.
What prestige have you gone down? Ghost-Faced Killer. What? Was that its actual name?
That sounds like something that's like been poorly translated or something. Its name is Akukai, but that translates into Ghostface Killer.
Hedonistic vampires we'll put as literal fiend vampires.
Mm-hmm.
Susceptible to holy more than others. Complete adventurer from 3.5, yeah. Okay. Oh wait, put down the wrong one. I'm getting my H's mixed up. Hedonistic ones are so for the selfish ones then, they're incredibly vain. So would you say that it would be quite cool to steal some of the mythos from do you remember the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that guy who had the painting?
Mm-hmm. The picture of Dorian Gray.
Picture of Dorian Gray, because that's an actual
book.
That's an actual book, yeah. Steal a bit of that, in that they have a kind of vain side, but as they take damage or something, it like physically shows on their body even where they weren't hurt, and then they become more enraged at their own sort of hideousness because they're so vain.
Yeah.
So it kind of like spirals. Like the more you damage them, the more dangerous they get, because they're like, how dare you cut me? How dare you dirty me and sully me?
That could be the loophole vampire of these vampires can see themselves in mirrors, but they actually hate it because they don't view their reflection as good enough.
They just review them as in like they're completely decayed, and the longer they go on in life, the more decayed.
So that could be a telltale thing of like, they keep breaking all of these mirrors and things like that, and you could literally use a mirror in the fight against them because they see themselves as they truly are, and it's like, ah!
They become less beautiful and less humane. I suppose would be the best way to put it. Less humane. I need to cut this one out because that's not for them. It's for these guys. There we go. Let's have a look at this. Yeah, Ghost-Faced Killer. Long ago, a persecuted clan of dangerous warriors sought a way to take revenge against their oppressors. Through sorcery, the spellcasters of the clan beseeched dark spirits to reveal a way that their clan might survive the coming strife and take revenge on the emperor who sought to crush them. The clan members struck a dark bargain, and the demon spirits they had contacted provided the clan with a means to the bloody ends they desired. Donning terrifying masks to hide their identities, warriors of the clan crept into the imperial palace, and through the evil power of the pact they had made, passed invisibly and intangibly into the imperial household and murdered the entire imperial family, plunging the country into a bloody civil war once again. No one ever discovered the clan's honourless actions, and to this day no one knows that the clan the Ghostface Killers came from.
Blimey.
So like V for Vendetta kind of thing.
A little bit, yeah.
No one cared who I was until I put on the mask. Okay. Alignment. Any evil.
Any
evil. Yeah, that's very cool. That is very cool. Golthias-esque vampires. Being staked causes them to transform into a blighted form, which is nastier. I wonder if they could do that themselves then, as like a power thing. If they choose to do it to themselves, it's like you take they take a butt ton of damage, but you transform, and it only stops when it's removed. That could be cool.
Fightful Attack. Beginning at 3rd level, a Ghostface Killer can panic onlookers and even frighten his victim to death by making a sudden strike attack. Once per day, Ghostface Killer can designate a melee sudden strike as a Frightful Attack. Ghostface Killer must use his power attack feat on the attack and must take a penalty of at least -1 to his attack roll. If the attack deals damage to the target, the victim must make a will save, DC 10 plus the Ghostface Killer's class and level and their charisma modifier. If the victim succeeds, she is shaken for 1 round per class level of the Ghostface Killer. If fails, instantly dies of fear. Creatures immune to mind-affecting effects, fear, or with hit die that exceeds the Ghostface Killer character level are immune to this attack.
So that's, for 5th edition translation, that is basically like the Banshee's Scream, but as a sight-based thing as opposed to a sound-based thing.
Yeah.
Because that, do you remember when we
God,
fought
previous
one of them?
editions, there's so many words in there. It's just like it's this and this and it's this and it's
They're
this
all
and it's
buzzwords
this.
that are tied to things.
I know,
Yeah.
it's just so much to
Can
take
make a
in.
melee sudden strike. Well, that's a thing from older edition. That would be, you know, it's like we say when you take the attack action. It's like, can I make a grapple as an opportunity attack?
Yeah,
No,
I get
an
it.
opportunity attack is
It's just
not
because
an attack
because I don't know what they are. That's
yeah.
all.
It's just old
In
terminology.
addition, all creatures within 30 feet who see the frightful attack, not including the victim, the Ghostface Killer, or the Ghostface Killer's allies, become panicked. If the hit die is less than the Ghostface Killer's DC, or shaken if their hit die is equal to or exceeds the DC. For 1 round per class level of the killer. A successful will save against the DC negates the effect. Basically.
So different levels of fear.
Yeah. So basically you can do a special attack against somebody that is so horrifying that they can immediately die of shock, and anybody who sees that attack has to make a save or they'll be frightened, is kind of what that devolves into.
Limited a bit because this is a player character's curse. You don't want to give them the ability. Well, I mean, is it too powerful? Well, if you're up against bosses, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd extend it to the frightened and even the stunned condition. That I think would be cool.
Yeah.
To be able to, essentially you stun them for mechanical reasons, but you have frightened them so much that it's not just a case of they're frightened and they run away from you. You have frightened them so that they're so scared they cannot move. You have just completely taken them out of action for a turn as they stand there crapping themselves. You should be happy you never had to deal with 3 and 3.5.
We did, like, once.
Yeah, we
Once.
We dabbled with the surface of it and we went, not for us.
Nah.
thanks, not for us. Although, having said that, I feel like if I went back to 3 and 3.5 edition, I'd probably enjoy it more now.
Yeah.
Because I've played 5th edition and I like the simplicity and I'm eager to add more to 5th edition. 3rd might go a bit...
Thus what we are doing.
Thus what we are doing now. I imagine 3rd would probably take it too far, but I think it would definitely be cool and insightful to read through it and see what were rules that they felt were important to include in the book and how did they address them. I feel like that would be, you know, quite eye-opening as to, you know, what has been taken out before getting to 5th edition and what do I feel could have been brought in, maybe not in the same wording though, because I've only heard rumours of like the grapple check as just being like the people's go-to example of like, oh, you know, you want to know how hard 3rd edition was? Well, their grapple thing was like this much on a freaking page. It was ridiculous. And it's like, okay, well, is there a middle ground between that and 5th edition not caring about martial stuff and being like, just do an athletics check?
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to knock someone prone or disarm them, or if you're trying to do anything fancy in combat, just do athletics check. What if I'm not athletics? Then you can't do it because you're shit. So stop asking. Just make an attack roll.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Every single rogue in the party of, I would like to climb this. Make an athletics check. Can I use acrobatics?
No. That's an actual feat of athletics.
Every single rogue on the planet, can I use acrobatics?
Like any martial class where it's like, can I do cool stuff with my sword? Make an athletics check. Well, I didn't take proficiency in that because I didn't see myself as a runner and a shot putter or anything. Doesn't matter. We've tied it to this thing. Can I make an attack roll because I'm using the skill with my weapon? No!
Make an athletics check.
Well, then I won't bother and I'll just hit him then, I suppose, because they really dumbed down martial classes in 5th edition, which is a crime because there's so much fun stuff you can do with martial classes. I want to play a barbarian who fucks people through walls.
I know this.
I want to do this.
I know this and I love you. Spook thinks that all martial classes should basically be some form of battle master as a base, and then they get class stuff on top of that.
Yeah, I do. And I feel like they shouldn't have like wimped out or given up when they were doing the disarm bloody rules because they didn't finish them. I disarm the opponent. Okay, what happens to the weapon? It says it drops to the ground. Okay, so then either I use my movement to pick it up, but I have to have a free hand. Well, chances are, because I've spec my character to have full hands, a sword and a shield, I can't pick up his weapon. Or when it comes to his turn, he'll just pick up the weapon, and I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Flesh out these rules. Disarming opponents is an incredibly useful thing to do in a fight. Especially when you then go through to shut up! Especially when you go to the trouble of them putting in for like, what was it, Eldritch Knights and stuff, where they get bonded to their weapon. It's like, as a bonus action, you can summon your weapon to you. Cool. No one's taking my weapon from me, so what is the point of that? Pointless. Back to Vampires.
You okay? Do you feel better now?
A little bit.
Do you feel better for that?
A little bit. I want to play a cool martial class. And I feel it's possible, but it's just a case of I'm going to have to make it myself. No one ever plays a rogue who's a bruiser or a footpad or an enforcer from the Thieves Guild. Yes, I agree with that. That would be a cool thing. That's why I like bugbears. Bugbears are cool because they're technically rogues, but they are brute rogues. That's cool. And they have long limbs and stuff, so they're encouraged to use bludgeoning weapons, but they are sneaky. Just because they're big and heavy, they can still sneak about. You know, it's like having a bear fight. Yeah, bears don't just run around bashing trees over and stuff. They're still animals. They still sneak up. Like tigers are strong as fuck. They still sneak up on you quietly and then jump at you at the last minute. They don't just go barreling around like.
Funnily enough, one of the major villains in our game was somebody who was big and bulky, but also was quick and stealthy and very fast. And it was just like, "Hello, I'm now in your face," and it's like, "Ah!"
Yeah, that's.
You should not be able to move that fast.
Yeah. I've come up with a buzz phrase in my head that I feel one of these vampires needs. Unsightly visage, chance to freeze someone with fear. Yeah, that was the kind of thing we were.
Maybe the hedonistic ones can get that when they become horrific.
Yeah, I can tie that to them. That's
put that into a hedonistic one.
Let's put a little unsightly visage. That's a cool phrase. Quote.
Yeah.
The Viking.
Something like if it's tied to their health, then it's something like when the vampire drops below half health, it gains ability to this. It gains this ability.
Can cause creatures, not enemies.
Creatures.
Can cause creatures to be stunned.
Stunned. Brackets frightened? Question mark. I don't know.
Stunned. And / or frightened. Again, I'm only using the word stunned because that's an actual 5th edition term. Frozen isn't. It's not a thing. Unfortunately.
Yeah, frozen isn't a status effect in 5th.
Yeah, we're using the word stunned, but basically we mean so scared that you actually don't run away, you just stand still. Because that's all stunned is. But what stunned is like you can't take actions or reactions and you can't move.
Yeah,
it's like the worst thing
stunned is like you've been given a wallop on the head and you're basically like, ugh.
Yeah, so we're using the word. The target is considered stunned, but it's just a case of you can't do anything. Stunned is the worst thing in the world. Probably only not quite as bad as unconscious.
Yeah,
but
one step above unconscious.
Yeah, literally marginally. In other games, if it's like you're stunned for a turn, it's like, oh dang. In D&D, it's like, cool. Well, I'm basically dead because I can't do anything. I may as well not be here. Can cause creatures to be stunned and/or frightened for a round. That's cool. I like that. I like that. I think we've come up with some really cool vampire ideas.
We got
these
some good
are
stuff.
Varied and they're all unique to one another and how they come about in roleplay. And then what we want to do next, we were talking about this when we went for our walk, is we want to come up with nameless blurbs that people could pick and choose from. So there's no this line of vampirism comes from this specific person that we've invented. It will just be like there was a legend of a guy who did something or aimed for something and became cursed with vampirism, and that is what ties it to this bloodline. So when you're making your D&D world, you can invent the people that are in these legends, and you sort of fill the names in yourself, but you follow along with the plot line and say, I like the idea of this one. I like the idea of a a guy that just became one with nature and he was never around society, and he just became the king of the jungle, essentially, a Tarzan type figure, and that's how he became a werewolf. He wasn't cursed by a god specifically. He was just so powerful in and of himself that nature just made him into this thing, and he spawned the first werewolves. And you can be like, I'm going to pick that one
Yeah.
for this bloodline because that sounds cool as fuck, and you just put it in, and you
then,
give him a name.
And then you've got the basic stuff of like, this guy just, murdered a hell of a lot of the people, so as punishment he was turned into a beast because, the gods were like, well, you're basically just a beast now, so...
Yeah, hell spat him back out onto the earth or something and be like, you will now kill for me because it's funny, so...
As I said earlier today when we were talking about it, the World of Warcraft, the Worgen of, like, they're just druids who essentially kind of screwed up a little bit.
Yeah. Marconian vampire, totally different from Rodkovian vampire or whatever they invent. I don't know either of those things.
I don't know either.
Oh, blue's taking. Did you mean Draconian? Or is this from a...
Marconius. White Wolf wiki.
Ooh. Is this like another game or something then?
Oh, they were...
Oh, right.
Thanks, Simon! You're really confusing us.
Most people would say Vampire A different from Vampire B, but no, Simon goes whole hog, and he already gives them names.
We know this. This is new. This is not new information.
But yeah, I get exactly what you mean though. So you can put in the way that this bloodline came about is from completely different points in history. A and B are boring though. They are. But yeah, I completely get what you mean. So you could have in your world, if you were like, I want to have Dracula and I want to have like, the tragedy with his wife and whatnot, you could put that in for one of them, and then, Gulthias is a different one of like, we know how Gulthias created the Blight, but how did Gulthias come about? And you could have a story for how he got his vampirism, and although they are technically a vampirism, they are of the same curse. The way they got it would be different, and then you can say, well, for my world, I don't have Dracula and Gulthias and Strahd and whatnot. I have these different people, and you can say, okay, well, you've got a true vampire, which is your equivalent of Dracula or Strahd, so give him a name, and then you can choose any one of the backstories. And you like the idea of the blighted vampire thing, but you don't want to call them Gulthias. Okay, well, you can change the name and just keep the little blurb backstory thing that we've put on.
Yeah.
Should we maybe call it there?
I suppose so. Coming on to
10:30.
10:30. We've been here for close on to an hour and a half-ish. We started about 9.
2 hours and 7 minutes we've been streaming.
Oh, fair enough. Blimey, longer than I thought.
But yeah, hope everyone who's still got 10 viewers.
Blimey.
So I hope everyone who's here has been enjoying us talking about
Rambling about it, and apparently Spook went off about fighters for 10 minutes.
I'm very upset.
I know this, and I love you very much.
Now that I have seen like what spellcasters and like martial classes can do, and it's like, well, spellcasters have all individual spells that do individual
Don't
things.
start again. We'll have a stream where we address this.
Yes, we will.
We're going to have a stream where we address the injustice of the martial classes, but for now we're doing Lycanthropy and werewolves.
Of course, we'll do your thing first, because you like furry
we did
shit.
all the vampire stuff. Like, the first time we did this, we mostly made a start on werewolves. This time round, we got a good chunk. We got like 2 pages of stuff on vampires done. And I like all these bloodlines that we've formulated together. We even got some abilities penciled in.
Yeah, those are. I think that would make vampires in a D&D world really cool, because you can pick and choose which ones you like, and you're like, I'm going to throw some of these kind of vampires at the party, because then there's the chance that somebody might get bitten and changed.
Yes.
And that will make things
I think the general hope is that we end up with a little document filled with vampire and werewolf stuff, which is basically either gives people loads of really customizable stuff so that they can pick and choose to make a vampire and werewolf how they want, or even alternatively, you could literally make a short campaign which is all about being vampire hunters, and you've got to work out how to kill all these 10 different types of vampires, and that could literally be an entire game, hopefully based off all of the stuff that we create.
Yeah, we really like the idea of, if you've got someone who's starting and they're like, I don't know D&D, but I really like vampires, I think vampires are cool, can I play a vampire? And they go, well, yeah, you can. Roll on these tables to see what your vampirism is, and whatever the results of that is, I will then create the bloodline going backwards as to how we get to you. And then it's specific to whatever you've rolled. Yeah, that makes a world interesting.
You can end up with more plot points of you run into somebody who has lycanthropy, but you look at the tables that you've sort of made beforehand, and it's like, well, is this somebody who is willingly a vampire or a werewolf, or is this somebody who wants to get rid of the lycanthropy? And it's like, oh well, now we have a quest to help them.
Yeah. So hopefully it will add things across the board for both players, for DMs, for the world, for NPCs, for plot lines.
That's the hope.
That's the hope.
It was good. We made really good progress tonight.
Yeah, I want to do this again. I want to do this like more regularly because we have a lot of fun when we do this.
We do, yes.
It's, good to brainstorm.
We'll try our best. Obviously, certain people's sleep schedules can be a defining factor, but we can try.
Well, you've just got to stop waking up in the middle of the afternoon, haven't you?
Okay, I walked into that one. Fine. Right. We'll see you again soon, guys. Tomorrow is Art Stream. So you can tune in tomorrow and watch me scribble down some ideas from my brain. I don't know what I'm going to draw yet. So
you will see me miraculously turn into a beautiful female in this corner, and I will change the little borders to red.
It's an amazing skill he's been practicing.
Yeah. I was going to try and imitate Curls' voice, but Curls might be the only person who actually has a voice that is maybe slightly deeper than mine. But like on the female spectrum. I can make my voice go higher to imitate people, but I can't go, lower to me is just talking low. It's not really low.
No.
It's not deeper. I'm just talking like an idiot. I can't go
That's
bassier.
the grog voice.
Yeah, I can't go bassier.
Fair enough.
I can do high pitched voice.
Yeah. Tomorrow for Art Stream, Wednesday to actually see us play a D&D game rather than just talk about it.
Yep.
So, see you then, hopefully. Love you all. Have a good evening. Mwah. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye!
Good night.
Oh, I've got a freaking scene. And this is the first time I've ever had these. These ones. Bye-bye!